His name is Wally West, and he's the fastest man alive. Featuring key roles in shows like Young Justice and Justice League Unlimited, Wally West has quickly become a fan favorite for those in the comic book space. As the Flash, Wally's been depicted as the kind of hero who cares about his friends, family, and even his villains. He's the type of hero to make the sacrifice in Young Justice that saves everyone. And he's also one of the few legacy characters who have obtained their mentor's title and maintained it in the long run. What if I told you that Wally West as a character is more than just a kind-hearted speedster, but he's also a racist, misogynistic, selfish person? Or at least he was. Today, I want to talk about the run that took Wally West, the scummiest man alive, and transformed him into the hero we all know and love today. We begin our story in 1985. DC Comics introduced Crisis on Infinite Earths, a 12-issue event written by Marv Wolfman with art by George Perez. At the time, DC's continuity was a bit of a mess, with stories featuring plots that contradicted previous issues, leaving readers confused and upset. This frustration extended beyond the limits of just readers and also reached the heights of writers like Marty Pasco stating, "Don't put conflicting books on the stand at the same time so the kid can decide, I'm gonna read Marvel where things make sense." And then DC loses its audience. Marv Wolfman, the legendary writer behind the New Teen Titans, shared similar concerns, which were only amplified then in 1981 while working as an editor for Green Lantern. He received a letter from a frustrated reader complaining about a plot hole in a recently released issue. Dear DC, Green Lantern's futuristic epic in 136 to 137 was simply superb. It was a little depressing to learn that the Gordarians will still be buzzing around centuries from now. You mean the Teen Titans are never going to get rid of those pests? What I found interesting was Myra's explanation for why they failed to recognize Green Lantern, and records don't exist before the Great Disaster, which should indicate that Space Ranger and Iona Vane followed the OMAC Commandy Jackson timelines. However, Myra evidently didn't have access to Showcase 100. In their first team-up, they do recognize each other. Oh well. Maybe JCH can come up with a clever explanation to bail out Marv. Sincerely, Gary Thompson. This letter was the straw that broke the camel's back and convinced Marv Wolfman to pitch Crisis on Infinite Earths. This story had one major goal: to take the confusing continuity of DC and clean it up by resetting the multiverse to a single Earth. So how did Wolfman decide to close off this confusing saga of multiverse shenanigans? By going back to the character that introduced them, Barry Allen, the Flash. It was in the 8th issue of this series that Barry Allen chose to make the ultimate sacrifice, destroying the Anti-Monitor's antimatter cannon by running so fast that he himself disintegrated. But with death also came rebirth. While Barry Allen died, the Flash lived on in his protege, Wally West, who then took up the title as the fastest man alive. It wasn't until 2 years later, in March of 1987, that we were introduced to the new Flash comic written by Mike Baron. This run was met with very mixed reviews. In this run, Wally West makes questionable decisions. He's an active womanizer who dehumanizes women by calling them insecure, soft, and meant for tending the hearth and raising the children. He also won the lottery, and how did he spend that money? Well, he bought himself a mansion and a sports car, and not much else. Because, why give money to those in need? And if that wasn't enough, Baron also writes a Wally who cheats on his girlfriend and leverages his position as a metahuman in order to obtain free health care in exchange for delivering an organ to someone in need. While at first you might look at Wally's actions as the result of someone lashing out from the death of a mentor, as the run moves forward, it quickly becomes clear this is not a temporary outburst, but a set-in-stone personality trait set for Baron's Wally West. Now you may be asking yourself, why on earth would Mike Baron choose to write this character in such an unheroic way? Some people would hold the opinion that this is partially due to Baron's drug abuse during his run on The Flash. In fact, Baron himself admits that partially had an impact on his writing. And while Baron's addiction no doubt fueled the flames of questionable decision-making and misogynistic storytelling, there's no clear indication of what Baron regrets specifically about his run other than the fact that he ran out of ideas and overwrote a bit. Both of which are definitely true. In the end though, this lack of direction did not just limit itself to Wally West as a character, but also extended to his supporting cast. Wally's dad was randomly revealed to be a manhunter. Wally's mom, Mary West, chose to move in with Wally and Tina, his at the time girlfriend, with no other objective than to butt heads with Tina and micromanage Wally. It also doesn't take a lot of research to discover that Mike Baron is an active member of Comicsgate, which is an alt-right harassment campaign meant to oppose diversity and progressivism in the North American superhero comic book industry. A brief scroll through other stories he's written and his Twitter provides all the context you would need to explain the direction Baron chose to take Wally for his run. Some people might make the point that for a character to be interesting, they have to undergo arcs for character development. Just because Wally was a terrible person doesn't make it bad writing, and perhaps that argument would hold some weight if Baron had developed Wally in any way, shape, or form during his time writing the Scarlet Speedster, but he didn't. Both Wally and all of his supporting characters remained flat, surface level, and for the most part, uninteresting. That's not to say that this run didn't have its redeeming qualities though. It'd be a lie to say that the art by Butch Geist wasn't phenomenal. And while I'm not a fan of Baron, he did introduce interesting concepts like Velocity 9, an addictive drug that provides the user with temporary super speed at the cost of destroying their body inside out, and Wally's dependence on consuming crazy amounts of calories. On top of that, Baron introduced an original cast of villains featuring the AI menace known as Kilgore, and the enemy-turned-friend Chester B. Runk, also known as Chunk, who harbors a singularity within his body. But it wasn't until a new writer picked up the title that we began to see the development of Wally that made him feel like a real, nuanced, and heroic character. And that writer was William Messner-Loebs, joined by Greg Larocque on art. Together, these two saved the Flash series. Together, they wrote the comic run that defined Wally West. Beginning with issue 15, Bill was given the Herculean task of developing Wally as a character in a way that wasn't jarring or abrupt. So how did Bill choose to start this journey? He brought Wally back to his roots, taking the fastest man alive and forcing him to slow down. In the last issue of Baron's run, Wally lost his millions and was injected with Velocity 9, resulting in him losing his super speed. By the end of this issue though, Wally had regained his powers, but Bill decided to run with this concept, and started his run with a powerless Wally. From his very first issue, Bill was on damage control. He starts by shifting the previously boring dynamic between Wally and Tina to be more nuanced and complicated. For the entirety of Baron's run, the relationship between the two was simple. Passively poke at each other with surface level dialogue. In issue 15, after having an argument with Tina, Mary gets a phone call from a bakery asking for clarification on what to write for a cake. This cake was meant as a surprise from Tina to Mary for her birthday. This leaves Mary in shock, realizing that she's been unnecessarily harsh on Tina. Meanwhile, Tina was trying to do something nice for her. For the remainder of Bill's run, Mary starts being nicer to Tina. The two of them form a closer relationship, with Tina even confiding in Mary, where she admits the weak foundation of her and Wally's relationship. In this single issue, we established dialogue between these two characters that in the last year worth of Flash comics had not been seen before. This conversation was a pivotal moment that forced Tina to realize that their relationship just wasn't working. On the other end, Wally's character shift is more gradual. Now without powers, Wally decides to visit a hospital for sick kids, reminiscing on the fact that Barry used to do this regularly. But Wally continues to make questionable decisions. While taking a break from talking with the sick kids, Wally gets into a conversation with a nurse and instantly starts sexualizing her, daydreaming about how she'd be a better girlfriend than Tina, and ultimately decides to break it off between the two of them. In the middle of his piggish daydream, Tina approaches him, asking to speak her mind. In the end, she breaks it off with Wally. Now you'd think that given his decision just mere moments ago to break it off with Tina that he'd be relieved. Instead, he realizes what just happened and starts asking himself how he can ever get her back. Shortly after, Wally arrives at his apartment to begin clearing it out because he's just been evicted since he has no money. And he receives a phone call from his landlord, begging for Wally's help because his daughter had been kidnapped by Vandal Savage. Wally's response? "I'm sorry. Wally West doesn't live here anymore. He's been evicted." And then he hangs up the phone. At this point in Bill's run, Wally begins to shape into a slightly better person. He's using his time to bring joy to those in need, but at the same time, he's still exhibiting some more selfish traits. And on top of that, he's still clearly holding on to some of his more misogynistic tendencies. But even then, with his vendetta against his now ex-landlord, surely the Flash would come to the rescue of an innocent child in need. The next issue features Wally agreeing to help, after making his landlord squirm for a bit of course, and accepting an offer of payment. Mind you, Wally still has no powers, but he still chooses to suit up and face the threat. Throughout this issue, Vandal Savage leads Wally down a series of challenges, each with a note hinting to the next to save his landlord's daughter. The first is a mafioso, working for Vandal, who puts Wally and his friends at gunpoint and fires a series of bullets. At the very last second, Wally jumps in front to protect his friends and catches the bullets, having regained his strength in an act of selflessness. He quickly disarms the crooks and obtains the first note, which leads Wally to a warehouse. Inside this warehouse, he finds a Russian speedster rigged with explosives that will blow if he moves even slightly. Mind you, this is a Russian speedster who tried to kill Wally in Baron's previous run. Alongside the bombs is another note. And with that note in hand, Wally could have simply left, but instead he insists on trying to save him. "I'm a Titan, and Titans don't leave someone to die without trying. We just can't do that." What follows is an action-packed page where Wally rips all the bombs off, gets to a safe distance, and narrowly escapes the blast of the explosion. The final note leads Wally to a very intentional location, both on Vandal's side and on Bill's, and that is Barry Allen's grave. Now, of course, for Vandal, this is just great psychological torture. You're forcing Wally to face the death of his mentor. But for Bill, this is a literary device. Upon arriving at Barry's grave, Wally realizes he hasn't visited Barry since the funeral. This moment, however brief, serves as one of many seeds Loeb plans to explore Wally's character and his emotions surrounding his fallen mentor. Wally quickly digs up the grave and rescues the little girl, returning her to her father. What follows is what I consider to be Wally's first step towards being a better hero. He refuses the money and insists that the landlord give it to someone who actually needs it. This ending creates a sharp contrast to the Wally that came before. In Baron's run, Wally demanded some form of payment to do a simple simple act of heroism for an innocent person in need of a heart. In contrast, Bill introduces us to a version of Wally who now places more importance on his role as a hero, so much so that he chose to save a villain he went up against, gave up the opportunity for payment even while being completely broke, and showed up to be the Flash even though he had no powers. The story that comes after this is arguably one of the best issues written by Bill in the earlier portion of his run, The Secret Origins Annual #2 starring the Flash. This issue features Wally visiting his therapist and retelling the story of when he became Kid Flash. He shares the lessons Barry taught him about being a hero, the heavy expectations that come with trying to match Barry's idea or concept of a hero, and the heavy expectations that came with that standard. And interestingly, it also explores the fact that Barry accidentally transformed Wally's suit into yellow using a matter transformer. In the conclusion of this retelling, Wally had a Freudian slip where he accuses the therapist of looking down on him for all his flaws while inadvertently admitting his own insecurities and fears, those surrounding his own inadequacy and what Barry would think of him now. His therapist concludes that Wally is suffering from imposter syndrome and tries to shift Wally's perspective, stating, "You saved 172 people and you shrug it off. Those people are important. They mean something." He also theorizes that Wally's struggles with his power are a symptom of the incident with the matter transformer. That in fact, the design that Barry forced onto Wally with the matter transformer was more than just a suit, but of the type of hero he wanted to be. Perhaps Barry thought to himself that if Wally were to use his powers for the wrong reasons, he shouldn't have them at all. And perhaps the matter transformer had an impact on more than just Wally's suit, but also himself. After all, Wally's top speed dropped only after he started to make decisions that he thought Barry wouldn't agree with. The story ends with Wally looking down at the photos of him and Barry, and the notepad denoting the 172 lives he'd saved. In this panel, we finally see Wally grapple with the pressure that comes with being the Flash, and begin to understand his more questionable decisions in earlier parts of the run. It's at this point where Wally's made a significant shift towards being a better, more likable, and understandable character. His questionable choices as a Flash finally have an explanation. Under the weight of the Flash mantle and the expectations Barry had, Wally buckled, leading him to forgo those ideals altogether. Now we get to the good stuff. For the remainder of his run, Bill explores Wally's imposter syndrome and forces Wally to face the harsh truth behind issues such as wealth inequality, homelessness, the war on drugs, and postpartum depression. But most importantly, he takes Wally down a journey of self-improvement, which allows him to become better not just as Wally West, but also as the Flash. Because by becoming a better hero, Wally West no longer had that mental block which forced him to slow down. And on top of that, Bill and Greg introduce one of the most impactful characters on Wally West to date, Linda Park. In issue 28, we're introduced to Linda Park, a TV reporter working for Central City TV, there to capture a fight between Captain Cold, Golden Glider, and the Flash. Unlike previous love interests, in her early appearances, Linda doesn't immediately find herself enamored with Wally. In fact, the two of them butt heads in the beginning, with Wally saying she only cares about her ratings and her calling him an arrogant slime. While her involvement in that issue is relatively minimal, she returns once more in a more central role in issue 31, covering a recent set of murders targeting homeless people. This story features Wally, Linda, and the Piper working together to lure the superpowered murderer to Pied Piper's homeless shelter. The plan is for Linda to broadcast about the shelter, which would then, of course, lure the murderer who's been targeting specifically homeless people. It's in this moment where Linda notes that Wally and Piper are brave for going up against this killer. Wally immediately shuts it down and insists that the homeless people who remained at the shelter are the real heroes. They're your story. Their relationship from that point takes a more frenemies angle, which I think is best. It makes sense that Linda Park, perhaps the most important woman in Wally West's life, stands out from others he's dated before. Linda wasn't immediately swept off her feet and enamored with the Flash. She saw through him, clear as day, and pointed out his character flaws, refusing to give in to Wally's cheap attempts at flirtation. Moving forward into his run, Bill continues to explore the theme of Wally's imposter syndrome. In issue 24, following the aftermath of DC's invasion event, Wally's lost his powers and seeks help from his friends, Jerry and Tina McGee, to regain them. Following the theory from Wally's therapist, Jerry rigs a device to Wally designed to send a surge of electricity through the pleasure centers of his brain. In tandem, they also douse him in the same chemicals that hit him when he first became Kid Flash. The results were catastrophic. Now with no mental block, Wally, not knowing his own strength, sent out a sonic boom stretching hundreds of miles away, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. It was in this issue that we learned just how powerful Wally is when he doesn't subconsciously hold himself back. From this point forward, we see Wally accomplish feats that the old version of him could only dream of. One of the most notable ones for me is in issue 30, where Wally's own body subconsciously stops time. It does this because the tip of a bullet had just started to press itself against his neck. Really think about this. That means that Wally's body, without him even realizing or feeling the bullet, forced him into overdrive as a defense mechanism. This feat was something of pure instinct. Needless to say, thanks to Jerry McGee, Wally was back and faster than ever. But this solution only addressed the symptom of Wally's imposter syndrome, failing to acknowledge the root cause. While Wally's powers were restored, he still struggled with the pressure of shaping up to what he thinks Barry would want. And because of this, Wally's unable to reach the top speeds he once did as Kid Flash. We see instances of this in the Flash Annual #3, where after accidentally making contact with Obsidian, he is faced with his worst fear: Barry saying he's disappointed in him. And in issue 34, Wally faces the Turtle, places him in a state of sensory deprivation, leading to delusions of Barry mocking him, calling him weak and unworthy. And shortly after, in issues 37 through 39, Wally is tricked into joining a cult, which is disguised as a therapeutic remote getaway, because the leader of this cult has convinced Wally that she can summon forth the spirit of Barry Allen, and Wally of course wants nothing more than to speak to Barry. In his desperation, he failed to notice any of the red flags associated with the organization and the people involved. The cult, of course, was all part of a scheme to get desperate individuals to shell out their money in hopes of a better life. It was none other than Linda Park who forced Wally to face the truth. Linda, being an investigative journalist, snuck her way into the remote getaway with suspicions that it was nothing but a farce. At this point in Bill's Flash run, Linda takes on a key supporting role for Wally. You might be wondering, after helping Wally realize the getaway was a scam, how does Bill set her up as a relevant cast member in The Flash? Well, he has her possessed by a ghost of a Scotsman named Seamus who has mystical abilities. Yeah, you heard that right. Issues 40 through 43 feature Wally and Linda's adventures as they try to figure out what caused the spirit to latch onto her and how to get rid of it. While a bit odd, these issues cover an arc I consider to be a building block of the relationship between Wally and Linda. Rather than shove them into a romantic relationship, Bill gives the two characters time to grow as friends. Linda confides in Wally about how frustrating and uncomfortable the situation with Seamus is, and Wally makes it a top priority to help her out, showing genuine concern for her situation. Fast forward to issue 49, Wally's mom and friends have been kidnapped by Vandal Savage, who rigged them all to die. Why would he do this? Well, Vandal recently flooded the streets with drugs with the intention of ending the war on drugs by making them commonplace. This had a ripple effect on the people of Central City, leading to an increase in homelessness and overdoses. And of course, our hero Wally had planned to stop Vandal in his tracks, but for once in his life, someone was faster than the Flash. Now with his friends held as hostages, Wally's forced to bend to the will of Vandal. It's revealed that Vandal has created an energy leeching device that saps Wally's speed from him as fast as he generates it. Upon realizing how dire his situation is, Wally rushes forward in a selfless attempt to take down Vandal Savage, but at normal speed, Wally stands no chance. Vandal takes out his gun and shoots him straight through the chest, killing him on the spot. For the second time in history, the Flash has died. So, is this how Wally's story ends? Not in some explosive crisis, but failing to save the ones he loves? Of course not. In issue 43, Wally encountered an artificial intelligence known as Kilgore that left a gift for Wally to use in his greatest time of need. It turns out that gift was an implant designed to bring Wally back from the dead. It is here where we witness what I consider to be the rebirth of the Flash. No, not that one. Not that one either. God, there are so many of these. Upon being revived, Wally is gifted a new suit, one I consider to be the best Flash design to date. A shiny crimson suit unlike any we've seen before. With his new suit in hand, without a second thought, he speeds off to Vandal's base, moving so fast he overloads the power system behind the energy leeching device, destroying it permanently. He takes on a dozen junkies hopped up on Velocity 9, empties Vandal's gun, and mocks him. You play dictator while old men have to grub in the street for bottles to survive. Refusing to be taken hostage, Vandal reveals he has rigged himself to explode, and upon clicking the detonator, vanishes into thin air, never to be seen again. Now you might be asking yourself, what does Wally do with his second chance at life? Shortly after being revived, Wally witnesses a plane hijacking. In the middle of taking the hijackers down, one of them lets out a gunshot, which depressurizes the entire plane and sucks out a flight attendant. After taking down the criminals, he stares at the hole in the plane and contemplates his next move. That woman was innocent, but surely if he jumps out of the plane, he's as good as dead, just like her. After all, he can't fly. Knowing the odds, Wally leaps out of the plane and dives through the clouds towards her. He catches her in midair and immediately starts kicking his feet to create drag. It's been 12 hours since he ate. He's hungry, dehydrated, and cramping, but he refuses to give up. Luckily, he spots a forest, and in a last-ditch effort, aims them towards the trees, wrapping her in his arms to protect her from the branches he describes as feeling like knives and the leaves that cut like razors. The issue ends with the two of them smiling, exhausted, and helping each other up. This issue serves as a perfect juxtaposition to the Wally West that Baron introduced us to. He was selfish, he only did things that benefited himself, and he wasn't the kind of guy to make the sacrifice play. That was until William Messner-Loebs got to writing him. The remaining issues of this run act to wrap up everything we've seen thus far. In issue 58, Wally is left with the fortune of a late villain known as the Icicle. In his last moments during the Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Icicle left a will stating that he wanted to make up for all the terrible stuff he'd done by bestowing the Flash with his riches in the event of his death. Of course, Wally, having now taken up the mantle, ended up with the money. And what does Wally do the second time around that he's been given obscene amounts of money? Does he buy a mansion and a sports car like in Mike Baron's run? No. He pays off his debts and uses the remaining money to open up charitable corporations. Issue 61 is the final issue of William Messner-Loeb's tenure on The Flash. It features Wally's mom, Mary, getting married. And who's invited to this grand occasion? Nearly every character featured in Baron and William Messner-Loeb's respective runs. This issue is everything it needed to be and more, featuring comedic moments like Wally's attempts to avoid his father, Wally picking up the Reverend who's stuck in traffic while helping others as the Flash, and the cherry on top, a moment where Wally sits back reflecting on the journey he's had and how it feels like a chapter of his life coming to a close. He looks around at everyone at the reception, Chunk and Connie, Tina and Jerry, Wally's mom and her new husband, and Wally's dad with his fake date he paid to be there. He realizes that he's the only one at the wedding without someone. It's in this moment that someone taps him on the shoulder, Linda Park, who sits down next to him and asks if he's alone. The issue ends with the two of them locking eyes and hinting that with the conclusion of this journey comes the beginning of a new one where Wally and Linda move forward together. Over the course of 50 issues, William Messner-Loebs took Wally West, a selfish, surface-level speedster, and transformed him into a true hero and a better person. One who helps others without expecting anything out of it, who's willing to lay his life on the line when needed, who rather than belittling women, respects and cares for them. Someone who has depth and emotion, struggles with imposter syndrome, and only wants to be the hero that Barry would have wanted him to be. The kind of man that Linda could plausibly form a relationship with. And while doing so, Bill expands upon what drives Wally's powers, allowing him to grow as a person and become the definitive fastest man alive. Yes, there can be no doubt that William Messner-Loeb's run on The Flash was the run that defined Wally West as a character and perfectly set him up to be the kind of man he needed to be for Linda. While Mark Waid is known as the man who developed the ironclad relationship between the two of them, without the groundwork that Bill Loebs laid, Wally would have remained a shallow, selfish, and unlikable character. One we never would have pictured forming a long-lasting and healthy relationship with a woman like Linda. But what happens between the two? How do Wally and Linda become the perfect power couple that we know and love? To answer that, I'll be deep diving into the run that perfected Wally West as a character in my next video, so stay tuned for that. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and stayed to the end. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know. It's been a long time since I made long-form content, so admittedly this is something I'm still getting comfortable with. And in terms of long-form content, this is probably one of the videos I spent the most time working on. I reread half a decade of Flash comics for this video, so I truly hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.